Okay, so today we're going to talk about slope-intercept form. First thing we're going to look about is the equation of lines. So this is going to be slope-intercept form. So in the upper right-hand of your note sheet, you're going to write, well, it already has y equals for you. You're going to write mx plus b. That's going to be slope-intercept form. That is going to be so incredibly important for the next two assignments. So you make sure you remember what slope-intercept form is, or you have it located on your notes where you can reach it. So the slope, we talked about last week, the variable m represents slope. Slope is always going to be the number being multiplied by x. It is always going to be touching x. Your y-intercept then, when I give you an equation, your y-intercept will always be the number that's by itself. So if I were you, even if I'm not you, write this down. So underneath slope, put number multiplied by x. So it's the number with x. Y-intercept, put, it's the number by itself. If you have that down, this lesson will be a breeze for you. So if you always remember that the y-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, that slope is the number always multiplied by x, and that the y-intercept is the number that's always by itself, you will have no problem with this lesson. Okay? Now go ahead and take a look at example number 1. Example number 1 is using the equation that we use on our function table. So it's y equals 3x minus 5. So we have y equals 3x minus 5 here. What I want you to do, the whole purpose of this lesson, the first thing I want you to do is identify your slope. So our slope, if you remember the notes we just took, is the number being multiplied by x. So what number up here is being multiplied by x? Or what number is touching x? 3. So 3, that's our slope. You could write it as 3, but remember I wanted, slope form, so you could write it as 3 or 3 over 1. Because our slope is rise over run. Now, the next thing I need to determine, you have to remember that y-intercept is represented by the variable b. Makes no sense, right? Like, why can't they use variables that start with what it starts with? Don't know. So y-intercept, the variable that represents y-intercept is the variable b. So when you see the variable b, it's looking for the y-intercept. So according to our notes, y-intercept is the number that's by itself. What number is by itself here? What type of 5 is that? So what's my y-intercept? Negative 5. Can you guys see that color? Yeah, okay. Now, from here, I'm going to go ahead and label my coordinate plane. From here, the first thing that you're going to do is that you're going to graph your y-intercept. So the first thing you do, you graph your y-intercept, because now we want you to find the slope and graph it. So what's your y-intercept? Negative 5. So on your y-axis, you're going to plot the point negative 5. So if I want to plot the point negative 5, am I going to count up 5 or down 5? Down 5. Okay, so I'm going to go down 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to plot my point. Now in our opener, we did this already. So we plotted a point. So we have our y-intercept, our variable b. I plotted at negative 5. So now from there, I just go ahead and graph my slope. What's my slope? 3 over 1. So from that point I just plotted, I'm going to go up how many?
3.
And then over how many?
1.
Plot that point. Draw my line. Make sure that line extends all the way through your coordinate plane. I can't, Your line here, guys, should not end on the plotted point. Because of the program that I'm using, it won't let me draw my line down a little bit. That's why my line's stopping right on that point that I plotted. But make sure your line extends out from that bottom point a little bit. I just can't with the program that I'm using. Okay. Does that help at all? So that's all we're doing today. That's the whole entire lesson. So I'm going to give you an equation. You're going to find the slope, you're going to find the y-intercept, and then you're going to graph it. That's it. So let's take a look at example number 2. So example number 2, you need to first find your slope and then your y-intercept. So remember, our slope is the number that's being multiplied by x. So what number here is being multiplied by x? So my slope is 2/3. So I'm going to write that next to my m. So m equals, or slope equals, 2/3. What variable does b represent? What does that mean? What is a 3? Or the b? What's it stand for? Say it again. It's the number by itself, which finds me the y-intercept. Yeah, so that variable b stands for the y-intercept, and the y-intercept is going to be the number that's by itself. When you go to graph this now, the first thing you graph is your y-intercept. So if I'm going to graph my y-intercept, my first point that I plot should be on which axis? Which axis am I going to plot this on? Yeah, the y. Shake that mouse. Or I don't know if that'll work or not. No. Let me pause this real fast. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to plot that 3 on the y-intercept or the y-axis. So I'm going to start at my origin and I just go up 1, 2, 3. Now, from there, I'm going to graph my slope. My slope, I'm going to start at my y-intercept and I'm going to graph my rise first. So what's my rise?
2.
So I go up 2, then my run is
3.
1, 2, 3. And I plot my point, and I graph my line. Bless you. Questions so far? Okay, let's look at example number 3. So example number 3, the equation that you're going to write down is y equals negative 5 over 7x minus 7. Okay, according to our equation, negative 5/7 represents my, what? What's negative 5 over 7 represent? So that represents my slope. So which variable do I put that next to?
M?
Yeah, m stands for slope. Good. So negative 5 over 7 is my slope. Okay. What's the next thing I need to find using this equation? Negative 7, that's going to represent my b, which is my y-intercept. Good. Okay. What's the first thing that I graph here?
Negative 7.
Okay, so I start at my origin, I graph my y-intercept, I count down 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Now, if I go to graph, or when I go to graph my slope, negative 5 over 7, because it's a negative 5, I'm going to count down what? But if I go to count down 5, what's going to happen? I have no room. So in order to graph this, this is one of the tricky ones, okay? Because I can't graph it because it'll go off the coordinate plane, what can I do with this negative so that I can graph it to stay on my coordinate plane? So if I turn this one here to a positive, what one has to become a negative then? Okay, now would you ever write out a fraction with the negative on the bottom? No. So we're just going to, just for the sake of graphing, so that we can graph on the grid, we're going to change the negative to the bottom. You would never write a negative in as the answer like that, but if you got a graph and keep it on the grid, you can move that negative to the bottom. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that now. So now that my negative 5 is no longer a negative 5 because it's going to be a negative 7, my rise is actually going to be a positive 5, right? So how many spots am I going to count up? 5. Oop. So let me get back to my grid here. So I'm going to count up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bless you. Now, usually my run, I always count to the right because to the right is positive. But because I changed it to a negative to graph it on the grid, instead of going to the right, which is a positive way, I'm going to graph it to the left because it's going to be a negative 7. So how many spots to the left do I move? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The only time that you ever do that is if when you go to graph it, it's going to graph off the grid. Now question, what kind of slope does this have? Just looking at the line, what kind of slope does this have? A negative. So just because I moved my negatives, did it change the slope from a negative to a positive? Nah. My slope's still negative. Can you wait? You're going to have to come back in and catch up. Did you write it on your register? Had Mr. McFarland's on it. Oh, wait. Y'all have this one down? I am telling you now, you will have one like this on your test. So you might want to put a star by it because you will have a problem like this that will be on your test next week. All right, example number 4. Bless you. Oh, man, I gave you another weird-looking one. That's right. So, when you have a variable that is by itself, in order to give it a value, you can just put a 1 up in front of it. So, what is the slope of this equation?
1 over 1.
Okay. So, the number being multiplied by x. What is my y-intercept?
-1.
It's the number by itself. Variable b is -1. What's my slope-intercept form equation? What's the equation for slope-intercept form? Y equals what? Upper right-hand corner of your notes. Y equals what? What's the equation? Slope-intercept form. Yes. Y equals mx plus b. Remember that. Okay. First thing I graph is my -1. So I go to my origin. I find -1 on my y-axis because it's my y-intercept. And then I graph the slope. My slope, I go what? Up 1. That one's easy enough, right? And then I graph my line. I'm not going to lie. My lines are getting better and better each example problem that we do. Questions on the front? Oh, no, because I'm really going to mix it up for you the last 2 examples. Good morning. Thank you. All right, let's look at example number 5. Oh, no. What's wrong with this example? No? So your equation is y equals 4x times, or sorry, y equals 4 over 3 times x.
There's no 0.
Say again?
There's no y.
There's no y-intercept. There's no number there. Why can't I put a 1 there?
Because it's 0.
Because it changes the value of it. Because there's nothing there for my y-intercept, what's my y-intercept? 0. Yeah. So my y-intercept is just 0. If there's not a number there for the y-intercept, it's just 0. So what's my slope? Okay. And I follow the same steps. So the first thing I graph is my, what's the first thing I graph?
The 0.
The 0. And that just It gets graphed right on the origin there. So I graph my y-intercept, my variable b. Then my slope is 4/3. So what do I do? So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then what? Over 3. I plot my point and graph my line. I thought that'd really trick you guys.
Do you want to put a star next to it or
No, you will have one like this on your test, but I don't think it's as confusing as the one where you have to move that negative. Okay, got it? Let's look at example number 6.
Okay, so
where's the
that's for the x.
Okay, so where's that? So remember, our slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. The slope is a number being multiplied by x. But what if you don't have an x up there? What's your slope going to be? If there's no x, the slope's going to be 0. But when we put our slope as 0, that's going to be our rise. What's our run going to be? 1. So then y-intercept is the number that's by itself. Well, here we just have one number by itself, right? So what's my y-intercept? 1. So the variable b equals 1. And now we graph. So what's my y-intercept? What do I graph first? 1. So I go up 1. And from here I graph my slope. Now, do I have a rise? No. What's my run?
1.
So I just go over 1, right? So then if I go to graph this line, not undefined. 0. Good. So if I go to graph this line, it's going to show that it has a 0 slope.
undefined?
Say that again.
So we can't
Say that again. What's undefined?
Undefined is when it's up and down.
When it's a vertical line, when it's up and down. A horizontal line is 0. So good. Perfect. Yes? You were going to ask a question. I cut you off a couple times. Okay. Last two. The last two are going to be completely different. Just put it under my keyboard. Are going to be completely different of how we start them compared to the first 6 examples. Put your check up by my water bottle. I need it. So let's look at example number 7. So, what's different about this example compared to every other example that we've done so far?
There's a number.
Okay, so slope-intercept form has the variable y by itself. So if I need it in the form of y equals mx plus b, if I need the y by itself, what do I have to get rid of? The 2. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of that 2. So how do I get rid of that 2? I'm going to divide by 2. If I divide my left side by 2, I then divide my entire right side by 2. Now remember, when you multiply and divide, you don't need to worry about like terms. When you add or subtract, you can only combine like terms when you add or subtract. Multiply and divide, it does not matter. So I'm going to rewrite my equation here to the right because I'm going to run out of room, okay? Actually, I'm going to write it right above my slope. So I now have the variable y by itself. What's going to be 6x divided by 2? What's 3 what? Okay. Then I'm going to take negative 8 divided by 2, which gets me?
Negative 4.
Okay. So now's your y by itself?
Yeah.
And are we back into slope-intercept form? Yeah. So now we have y equals mx plus b. So what is my y-intercept? Negative 4. Which variable do I write that by? B. What's my slope?
3.
And then what do I put under it?
1.
A 1. Good. What do I graph first?
Negative 4.
What do I graph first? I think I heard it.
Negative 4.
Negative 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then how do I determine my slope? From that point, I go up 3. Then what? Over 1. Plot my point. Graph my line. What time do we have? 19. We're going to save the last example for tomorrow. We're going to stop there for today.